Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and today I'm counting up the 10 worst Goosebumps books. Because after working my way through these 62 books over the past year, there were some duds we need to talk about. Ranking anything is inherently subjective, so I'm just trying to keep in mind the characteristics of what made a Goosebumps book bad to me, which tended to be the crime of being boring, nonsensical, or just a half-assed vibe. These are children's books after all, so let's not take this too seriously. Alright, let's hop right to it with number 10, The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. Also, there are obviously going to be some spoilers ahead for all of these books, so exit now if that bothers you. In this book, we actually had a solid setup for some creepy Yeti action up in the Alaskan tundra where Jordan Blake and his family were being stalked by an abominable snowman, only for it to take an aggressive nosedive at the midway point. No other book in this series has such a dip in quality at the halfway point. Like, this story was well on its way to being an upper tier book, but it really shits the bed. This book has chapters of great tension and a solid first encounter with the abominable snowman where you think this thing's actually capable of causing some damage, only for it to suddenly and inexplicably freeze solid, allowing for the Blake family to seal it up in a box and mail it home to California, where they proceed to keep it in a shed in their backyard. For a bit, it's like, how on earth is this creature staying frozen? But fear not, Stein has a solution for this. Magic snow. Yes, this book devolves into a plot centered around magic snowballs that freeze and spread snow to anything they encounter. Who needs a Yeti story? We got snow. The Blake's family's backyard is transformed into a winter wonderland in Pasadena, California, before Jordan's sister Lauren is hit with a snowball and frozen solid. We then have chapters devoted to defrosting Lauren by the stove, in the shower, and finally, the solution involves a now defrosted Yeti giving Lauren a giant bear hug and defrosting her through the power of Yeti love and body heat. Even talking about this now is giving me what the fuck flashbacks to when I first read it, and making me think maybe I need to move it higher up the list. Anyways, the book concludes with the Yeti taking off towards the Californian mountains, and we get no resolution whatsoever. Well, we do get a final page twist with some neighborhood kids finding some of the magic snow and throwing it around. This book was an emotional roller coaster. Number 9, Chicken Chicken. Now, I've seen this book ranked at number 1 many times, and it was always hyped up to me as the worst thing ever. Don't believe the hype. Don't get me wrong, it's by no means a good story, but it's far from the worst Goosebumps has to offer. This one suffers from a supremely silly cover, but actually contains some solid body horror, with our protagonist Crystal sprouting painful feathers, scaly skin, calcified lips, and her head elongating as her eyes migrate to the sides of her head. Aside from that though, yeah, it's pretty weak. At number 53 this late in the series, Chicken Chicken doesn't cover much new ground, and it suffers from some repetitive running back and forth between scenes, as the kids keep messing around with the book witch Vanessa. At its core, Crystal spends this book being punished for a crime she didn't commit by a manor tyrant of a witch, so it's not that much fun to watch her suffer. It ends the book with a lame twist, with Vanessa transforming Crystal and her brother into pigs after her brother rudely burps without saying excuse me. It's not a good book, but it's also not what its reputation may lead you to think it is. I think it just needed to commit and turn these kids into full-on chickens. Number 8, The Barking Ghost. As a kid, I was so excited to see a Goosebumps book centered around dogs because I was dog obsessed, so imagine my disappointment when I got this story. This book commits one of the worst crimes in all of Goosebumps. It's boring as hell. The protagonist is Cooper Holmes, and he's a coward. This lends itself to a book full of chapter cliffhangers revolving around nothing because Cooper is great at scaring himself out of thin air. At one point, he's scared by a garden hose. Once the ghost dogs do show up, they mostly just trash the living room and cause Cooper's family to grow concerned that their son is losing his mind. There's a half-baked twist at the end of the book involving some magic body-swapping trees that causes Cooper and his friend Fergie to body-swap into a pair of black labs, who were possessed by some random guys who are doomed to haunt the forest. Once the body swap into dogs happens, it's like Stein finds himself thinking, okay, now what? We have some telepathic dog antics, and the book ends with Cooper and Fergie accidentally getting body swapped into a pair of chipmunks instead. The whole book just feels like a wasted time, with a lack of even attempted scares, and a protagonist who is actively annoying. Number 7, My Hairiest Adventure. You know, this book left me puzzled where to place it, because it's certainly not good, but it has some moments that almost place it in the so bad it's good territory. This book is the infamous puberty horror book, where the characters spend multiple chapters horrifyingly discovering hair in places where there was no hair before. It's also the book that introduces us to Stein's low-key secret favorite Goosebumps hobby, dumpster diving, because the kids in this book literally root around in the trash, find some expired instant tan lotion, and proceed to lather each other up in it. It was moments like this that made me think, this is good actually. But aside from being an easy target for puberty jokes, the book itself is pretty dull in a lot of patches. There's only so many times you can make a character sprout hair and then have to urgently shave interesting. We also have a plotline with members of a friend group going missing one by one and mysterious dogs being left in their place. The final twist to this one is another Goosebumps mad scientist gone wild story, where we learn these kids were actually dogs all along and had been transformed into kids for infertile parents. It's a wild book, but by no means a good book. Number 6, Bad Hair Day. This book won't be nearly as much fun to summarize because it's solidly in the boring category, so I'll keep it somewhat brief. The protagonist in this one, Tim, is magic obsessed and has a Goosebumps bratty younger sibling named Ginny, who causes him nothing but grief. Tim sneaks out to a magic show where he steals the magician Amazo's magic bag, which results in extremely mild scares, such as red balls multiplying endlessly. At one point, Ginny eats a carrot for the magic bag and transforms into a rabbit, but anticlimactically turns back after some time passes. The climax of this one involves discovering that Amazo has been a puppet this whole time controlled by a rabbit who's the actual Amazo. You know, saying this all out loud makes the book sound way more interesting than it actually is, but trust me, it's like 3 fun moments sprinkled across 117 pages. The book ends with Tim getting an offer to star in Amazo's act, but the surprise twist was that Tim actually has to be the rabbit now. It's just another in a series of Goosebumps animal body swap stories without the charm. Number 5, My Best Friend is Invisible. This book is an odd mix of being painfully predictable with an offensively stupid random twist. This book features our protagonist, Sammy Jacobs, and he basically outlines the events of this book in the first few chapters, where his new unwanted invisible friend screws up a race at school for him, embarrasses him in math class, gets him in trouble in the library, and scares a friend at a haunted house. It's probably the worst book in terms of predictability. Like, Stein outlines the events that will be happening in this book. You insert what will probably happen if an invisible frenemy was there to fuck things up, and then that thing happens. It was the most tedious read by far, but it's all rendered even worse with a final twist. At the end of the book, we randomly find out Sammy hasn't been human this entire book. He's actually a monster. And when Sammy uses a convenient anti-invisibility ray gun that his parents just so happen to have, we discover this invisible friend is a human, which in this universe is a nearly extinct species. I have nothing against wild end of the book twists, but this one has zero clues towards it whatsoever, and it feels like Stein was fully aware this book was a boring mess, and the ending twist was a half-assed attempt at spicing it up. Number 4, Go Eat Worms. This is the rare Goosebumps book where the protagonist actually has a personality that stems beyond blank slate. Unfortunately, Todd Barstow straight up sucks ass, and I spent the entire book wanting bad things to happen to him. Todd is a gross, worm-obsessed little gremlin who gets off on torturing people with worms, and torturing worms themselves. He's also a petty, jealous little shit who probably would move on to torturing small animals in his teen years. In between finding new reasons to dislike Todd, the book just has pages and pages of nothing interesting. It's just repetitive worm talk, and jealousy from Todd. The book gets mildly interesting when at one point the worms seem to revolt against Todd after he slices one in half as a prank, but mild is being generous. Worms appear in various places, like Todd's hat, but this all ends up being a revenge prank from his sister Regina. Towards the end of the book, it tries to get interesting again when a giant tree-sized worm attacks Todd as he's digging for worms, and is about to drag him underground, except this comes to a quick halt when a passing papier-mâché bird scares the giant worm away. The final twist of this book is that Todd has moved past torturing and collecting worms, and onto torturing and collecting butterflies, except the book ends with a giant butterfly appearing at Todd's window with a 6-foot needle, and presumably spearing Todd, which I will fully admit is a highlight, but not enough to save the book. Number 3, Say Cheese and Die Again. I was never a huge fan of the first Say Cheese and Die. I thought it was fairly tedious, with a god-awful friend group constantly cracking bad jokes, so I was not thrilled to discover it got a sequel that was far worse. This book has the protagonist, Greg Banks, forget everything he learned from the first book, and immediately seek out the camera's proof against his English teacher, who doesn't believe his stories about the cursed camera. Greg's friends all beg him not to go, because in all reality, they all seem to suffer at the hands of the camera way more than Greg ever did in the first book. He ignores them and marches down to the abandoned house where they left the camera, only to find it torn down. This then leads to another book featuring dumpster diving, as Greg roots through the trash, including a rotted raccoon carcass in search of his camera. He finds it, but then Greg's reign of accidental terror begins as it becomes seemingly impossible for him to not take a picture of people. His friend Sherry becomes one of his first victims, and her picture comes out as in photo negative, which confuses the two kids because they have no idea what convoluted storyline Stein has in store for Sherry. Sherry then takes Greg's photo out of revenge, and his photo shows him beyond morbidly obese. The rest of the book then delves into endless fat jokes that become more uncomfortable as it becomes clear they will be unrelenting in this story, since Greg continues to grow with every page. At one point, his parents rent a van to haul him to the doctor because he won't fit in the car. Sherry, on the other hand, ends up wasting away into nothing as she rapidly loses weight. They ignore the resolution of the first book, which involved tearing up some of the photos, and instead have Greg's brother reverse the photos at a Photoshop lab, making Greg's photo negative and Sherry's photo normal. This undoes all the magic, and the book ends with Greg still taking the freaking camera to school, and his English teacher takes a picture of the entire class. The book aged poorly, ignored key elements of the original, added nothing new, and just felt supremely unnecessary. Number 2, Monster Blood 4. This book represents Monster Blood books 2, 3, and 4 because I didn't want this top 10 list to be half Monster Blood. The original Monster Blood is a fine story. I'm a simple guy. I love a good Blob monster story. But Monster Blood 2, 3, and 4 leave behind all that made Monster Blood interesting in favor of ham-fisting other stories under the Monster Blood name. Monster Blood 2 is a bully-centric story where a hamster ends up eating some monster blood and transforming into a giant violent hamster, which admittedly could be a good time. But remember, this story revolves around Evan fucking Ross and his best friend Andy, two of Stein's absolute least likable characters. Evan Ross is a whiny protagonist who makes the worst decisions at every available turn at the encouragement of his equally dumb friend Andy. Monster Blood 3 centers around Cousin Kermit, a kid mad scientist who is also an unlikable little jerk. The story again barely involves Monster Blood itself, and instead focuses on Kermit's magic potions and the eventual kid giant Evan Ross after he accidentally eats some Monster Blood. Monster Blood 4 foregoes Monster Blood entirely and instead focuses on multiplying blue leeches who just so happen to be found in a can of Monster Blood after some more classic dumpster diving from Andy. The entire Monster Blood franchise represents the worst of Goosebumps for me, with repetitive chapter cliffhangers centered around book bully Conan and decisions that are so bad they mostly feel random and solely made to further the already weak plots. I could not stand the Monster Blood books by the end of this revisited series. That being said, the Monster Blood books also have a fairly loyal fan base, so there's something to these books that appealed to people and warranted 3 separate sequels. Finally, number 1, Legend of the Lost Legend. My least favorite Goosebumps traits were being boring, nonsensical, and half-assed, which Legend of the Lost Legend combines perfectly into one shitty-ass story. This book was nothing but a series of random events strung together with something barely resembling a narrative. The story centers on siblings Justin and Marissa, who are on an expedition with their adventurer father for the Legend of the Lost Legend. The book itself opens with a nonsensical fake-out involving a race across a melting ice sheet, which ends up being just a campfire story. From there, we have these two kids roaming off into the woods in the middle of the night in pursuit of a mystery dog that leads them to a cabin in the woods where Ivana, a Viking-looking woman, lives with a feral beast boy Lucas, and Ivana pretends to poison the kids with chicken noodle soup. It's a lot to take in. Ivana reveals they'll need to complete a test to get the Legend of the Lost Legend, and when the kids wake up, they're in the middle of a field covered in some sort of nut. After pages and pages of aimless wandering, they return to the nut field, where the nuts hatch into rats, and our kids are promptly attacked. Except these rats are just wind-up robot rats. The kids then walk into the forest where they discover the trees are fake, and spend pages smashing plaster trees. The kids then get stuck in a river and are attacked by 2 gigantic cats, but don't worry, Justin releases one of the robot mice from earlier so they can escape. The kids find themselves back at Ivana's cabin, but guess what? She's a wind-up robot too. They somehow never noticed this the night before. And Luca, the Beast Boy, is actually a man in disguise, who gives the children the Legend of the Lost Legend for passing the test. Except no, 10 pages later, we learn, oops, Luca gave them the wrong treasure, so they go back to get the one they wanted. It's like the story that refuses to die. Is any of this making sense? This is legit what happened in this story. It was just one stupid random event after the other. Luca gives them directions to the Legend of the Lost Legend, where they find a group of old men who hand over the legend and disappear. But the twist is, whoever possesses the Legend of the Lost Legend gets lost forever. Get it? Isn't that clever? Legend of the Lost Legend feels like a free writing exercise gone horribly wrong that Stein couldn't be bothered to go back and edit, and for that it earns my number 1 slot on the worst of the Goosebumps list. Well, that's it for my top 10. Let me know in the comments your worst Goosebumps rankings. Are there any that you disagree with and actually like? Well, besides the Monster Blood fans out there. This list isn't meant to be that serious. With Goosebumps, even the bad ones have their moments of fun, for the most part. Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
the pride, the love,